folks. Hello and welcome to FCI Live 2026. This is week two of our series, and this topic is one I'm particularly excited about. Hopefully, you're here for this session. It is Need Food Access Solution Grocery Store. We're going to talk about it in just a minute. First, I want to thank our FCI Live champion sponsors who make it possible for this whole education series to be free to everyone, all cooperators across the country. Frontier Co-op, Cabot Creamery Co-op, and National Co-op Grocers. Thank you all so much for making this possible. All right, we're going to be talking to you today. Actually, I'm going to go back a slide. I'm going to be talking to you today about is grocery store the right solution? Anne and I will talk. Anne will introduce herself in a moment and who she is. We work both extensively, constantly talking to communities, both our organizations that need access to groceries and are working to find a way to make that happen in their communities. And the question comes up, is grocery store always the right answer? So we hope you'll stick with us for asking this question and thinking through the alternatives and when is the time to maybe consider some of the alternatives. So, today I am JQ Hanna. I am the Executive Director of Food Co-op Initiative. And just so you know who Food Co-op Initiative is in this conversation, we are a nonprofit organization that supports those working specifically to start cooperatively owned grocery stores or transition existing grocery stores to the cooperative model across the US. So we have free online learning events like this, programs, resources, tons of free resources on our website, tons of videos like this one on our YouTube channel. You can find them all at www.fci.coop. And Anne, could you introduce yourself to us all today?
Yes. Hi, everybody. So glad to be here. My name's Anne Misak. I'm the managing director for Equitable Food Systems with Reinvestment Fund. We are a national we're a lender. We work with projects that wouldn't qualify for bank financing. And in particular, we also run the America's Healthy Food Financing Initiative, which is a partnership with USDA. We provide grants, loans, and technical assistance to food access, so food retail and food retail supply chain businesses. And we work with a lot of cooperatives through that program, along with many other food access models. So excited to be presenting today.
Thank you, Anne. Anne's a member of our FCI board as well. We are very lucky to have her on it. And we want to talk about real quick what you can expect from the session today. We're going to cover an overview of the many ways communities are organizing to meet their food needs and and examples. So beyond the grocery store, other ways people are meeting food needs in their communities. We're going to talk about the pros and cons of working to open a brick and mortar. You might have heard this phrase a lot, a brick and mortar grocery store. And what questions should you be asking yourself when deciding on a business concept for your community food solutions and why? So we're going to spend most of this time looking at the potential alternatives, and we're going to answer some of those other questions toward the end. I'm going to start by framing this out a little bit. If you are experienced with Food Co-op Initiative, you may have seen this. This is the Food Co-op Development Framework. This is a framework that was developed by Food Co-op Initiative with input from experts and people organizing food co-ops across the country to bring together best practices that are applied in different ways in different communities, but all of these pieces exist in any startup food co-op that is organizing. And actually, we found from other co-op organizing organizations across the nation, works whether it's a food co-op or not, if you're trying to organize a community business together. And which part of that today does this topic focus on? And I just wanted to real quickly say it focuses on very specifically vision and business concept. So I want to talk really briefly about this because this kind of hones in on something that happens at startup food co-ops a lot when we first get calls from co-ops is like, we want a grocery store. And that's wonderful. And it doesn't mean that they've skipped the steps of really figuring out what the purpose of their project is and what the values are they want to manifest in whatever business they create to meet the purpose. Some of you may recognize purpose as mission. We don't get into mission is such a debated word, so we use purpose. But it's what your co-op exists to accomplish for who. So that could be to build the economic and physical wealth of Southeast Bricktown, which is one, these are made up examples, but similar to many food co-ops we've worked with, to strengthen our local food shed through access to local food and building of community in Center County. Or another example, to uplift Top Hill community through reliable access to high quality food in our neighborhood. Each of those are slightly different and but they define where are those people located, who are we trying to predominantly serve, and what are we trying to accomplish together for ourselves. And that doesn't define exactly what kind of business is going to do it. It centers us on this is what we're trying to accomplish. What business concept is the right one to make that happen? And so let's just take our third example of a purpose statement to uplift our Top Hill community through reliable access to high quality food in our neighborhood. And then often we jump from that purpose. We don't think through what exactly are the core values about how we deliver it, which can be we want to make sure there's equitable jobs, different things like the business must have these core values to really be what we're trying to accomplish. We skip that and we run straight to the business concept of, so we need a grocery store. And that makes sense. That makes complete sense why we do that. Usually, we decide we need a grocery store because we lost reliable access to high quality food when the grocery stores left our community, our neighborhood, and we see this in rural communities, we see this in historically redlined high population communities, we see this all over. That grocery stores move out, desert. And so we think the solution to getting back reliable access to high quality food is a grocery store. We get that. So, but will this be the right business concept? For many communities, yes. A cooperatively owned, meaning community-owned grocery store will be a terrific solution for many communities. And there's pictures below of many communities in which that is working. And there are literally now getting close to 200 just in National Co-op grocers alone. And there are well over 200 across the United States in all different kinds of sizes of communities. And so cooperative owned grocery store can be the right fit. But we're gonna encourage you to question if it's the right fit, to think through some other possibilities for multiple reasons. And we're gonna talk more about the reasons at the end. We hope you'll humor us and let Anne lead us through some of the amazing different kinds of dynamic food access projects that their organization is seeing across and funding across the US. So a reminder to those who are here who say, but we want a co-op. This term, a co-op, in the startup food co-op movement, often is used as a fill-in for cooperatively owned brick and mortar grocery store. But any business can be a co-op. And we want to take a moment to remind that that's not the business concept. The business concept is, are we doing a brick and mortar grocery store to get to our purpose? Or one of these examples that Anne's going to show you of many other different types of business concepts that still get healthy food into communities. That's the business concept. The co-op is a business ownership structure. So who's going to own it? And any business can be owned cooperatively. There is pictures here on the screen if you can see them. There are insurance companies that are cooperatively owned. There are lots of cooperatively owned housing where people own the housing that they're living in. Financial co-ops are credit unions. If you've ever seen a credit union, worked with a credit union, well, you are a member of a cooperative. And Blue Diamond Growers is if you ever buy Blue Diamond products at the grocery store, that's an agricultural co-op. Those are farmers who've come together and created a brand. There are utility co-ops throughout rural communities, so electric co-ops, retail co-ops, if you know who REI is, that is a co-op, and services co-ops, which are also often worker co-ops, like in this case, this is a picture of a home cleaning business owned by the workers cooperatively. And yes, the retail co-op can be REI, selling outdoor goods, or it could be a food co-op, a cooperatively owned grocery store. And it is common. Food co-ops are one of the largest groups of retail cooperatives, retail owning cooperatively owned businesses. But any business concept you come up with, if the co-op piece is what's deeply important to you, it can be a co-op. So we just want to get that out of the way. No one is saying that you can't have a co-op. Remember, your startup food co-op is a co-op before it builds whatever business concept it's going to build. It's already an association of people who have come together to pool their resources, their talent, their power to build something to solve problems in their community and make it a better place. All right. So with that said, we're back to this business concept. Could be a community-owned brick and mortar grocery store. It could be some other things. I'm going to turn it over to Anne from here to talk to you about some of those options that they're seeing through her work with the Fair Food Fund.
Thanks, JQ. Yeah, so like I said, we do, so we provide loans, grants, and technical assistance across the country to projects that are doing food retail or food retail supply chain. But food retail can look a lot of different ways, and that's, why JQ and I wanted to do this presentation today and just like really get your creativity, right? Like I think our goal is always what will work best in any community, right? And only you can answer that question. Only the community members can answer that question about like what's going to be the best business concept to meet the needs and the purpose that we've outlined. As JQ said, any of these can be cooperatively owned, but we want to just sort of talk through a lot of these things and go through how they can either be a stepping stone or an end product, right? So some of these could be on the way to your food co-op or your startup, food co-op. Some of these could be, what you accomplish, and all of them are very exciting and fun projects. So yeah, let's jump in and go to the next slide. I'm guessing most of you know what a farmer's market is. Some of you may have them in your communities. But that's in some ways one of the easiest things to start with is a farmer's market. You often need some tents, some tables, maybe a point of sale system, especially if you're going to be able to accept, SNAP or EBT. And you're hopefully going to have some relationships with some farmers. So these are two different ones that we've supported. One is Food Access LA. They run a lot of farmers markets around LA. And they one of the cool projects that they did that this is showing, they've actually started to do online ordering, so that you can order ahead and go and pick up your order. So if you can't go to the farmer's market that day, you can go online, and they've made it so that SNAP users can do that as well. They know folks are busy, right, and can't always make it to the farmer's market. I will say, depending on what your goals are, you may not want to do that. You might want people to come and linger, right? If you're trying to build community, if you're trying to build trust, if you're trying to organize around a co-op, um, about like getting towards that co-op, then you may actually want people to come and hang out. But again, I think it's just a great example of like you can take so many of these models and tweak them to fit the needs, right? If you need to do home delivery because you have a lot of seniors or a lot of folks that don't have transportation, right? Like those are all things that are possible, and they're possible in a lot of different models in a lot of different ways. Anyways, the farmers market, I think some folks find that that's the end goal. They run farmers markets, they have those relationships with their farmers. It's a seasonal thing, and that meets their community's needs for local food or for, additional produce. And sometimes it's the stop along the way. So I think like Sola Food Co-op, also in LA, we just have a lot of California. California has a lot of produce, right? So the farmers markets work really well there, but a lot of parts of the country can do farmers markets. They use it as an organizing tool. So they did the farmers market, and as they've been organizing towards a brick and mortar food co-op, it was a great way to meet an immediate need, get some food out there, and start organizing. All right, you can go to the next slide.
Yeah, and farmers markets are one of the most common step along the way things we do see food co-ops who are planning to do a retail grocery store attempt do, and eventually have to hand off the project because it's so successful to focus on the grocery store, but has built a ton of trust along the way. So it is one of the most common we see, even if you're still working toward a grocery store.
Yeah, for sure. Another potential option is a mobile market. These are a little bit more intensive in terms of startup costs, right? You're usually going to need, the mobile market piece. So a refrigerated, we've seen buses, trailers, trucks, you name it. So you are going to need something that can move around. I think one of the really great things about a mobile market is you can go to different places. So depending on, if it's not just your neighborhood, maybe there's multiple neighborhoods, and we've seen a lot of co-ops where like their geography is so large and it's hard to pick one location. And so a mobile market can be great for a situation like that where you need to meet the needs in different places, right? Or you want to go to, say there's 5 senior centers in, your 5 mile radius, and you want to be able to go to each of them, because those folks aren't going to be able to come to you, right? So a mobile market can definitely meet those needs. Definitely cheaper than a grocery store in terms of startup costs, a little bit more expensive than a farmer's market usually. So we're kind of in that in between place. I will say for all of these have the ability to do SNAP, so to accept SNAP and EBT. And we've also seen with most of these that they're able to do, a lot of states now have like a double up bucks program where if you spend, SNAP dollars, certain amount of SNAP dollars on local food, then you can get sort of that equivalent amount in like double up bucks, or they're called different things in different states. But it's essentially multiplying, someone's ability to buy local produce. So I will say, I think the one thing we talked about with the mobile market is that oftentimes this is maybe less of an intermediary step. We haven't seen too much of that where like this is the intermediary step and then it went to, a brick and mortar or co-op. This is often the end goal because it is a little bit more capital intensive. But again, for some areas, maybe, we've seen it too, both in rural and in urban areas where maybe like the population wasn't quite enough to support a full service grocery store or to support the brick and mortar grocery store. Again, the mobile market's a lot cheaper, like a lot cheaper than a brick and mortar store. And so, it was able to meet the needs of that community, getting produce, getting a lot of these can, if they are refrigerated, you can have meat and dairy. You can see the meat cooler in this one, right? You can have a lot of products and really, someone can actually do some of their grocery shopping at the mobile markets.
And do you have any, like, I should ask you ahead of time, I'm kind of dropping this on you. I mean, mobile markets are more labor or more capital intensive. They're also just more complicated than a farmer's market just to pull together. How long do you see it taking for go from concept to actually being to able to serve communities? Is there any kind of like sense of it, or is it kind of all over the map?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen, I think part of it, honestly, like the getting the truck or the refrigerated piece is probably the most capital intensive. But I mean, if folks have been able to raise money for that, you can usually get one of these up and running in 6 to 12 months. Sometimes it takes longer. And obviously, if you're going to do multiple stops, that can take longer to organize and figure that out. I mean, sometimes we've seen them start as literally it's just like someone has a truck that they, that they let, that they use. It's not refrigerated and they go to one stop and they sort of start the process and start getting food into the community. And then build towards I mean I would say probably a lot of them try to find a grant frankly to get that refrigerated vehicle. But again, we're talking the refrigerated vehicle, we're talking thousands of tens of thousands of dollars instead of millions of dollars. So it's it is it's more expensive than buying some tables and and some tents for a farmer's market. But it is definitely cheaper still than trying to build a brick and mortar grocery store. Yeah, so our next example is farm stops. They're getting a lot of, I don't know, they're like the cool new thing. So the original one was in Ann Arbor, Michigan. This one that we worked with is in Marquette, Michigan, which is a small town in the Upper Peninsula. And farm stops tend to be pretty focused on local food. They can work in different ways. Some of them work on like a consignment model where the farmers still own the product and it sits on the shelf and then, they're getting 75% of that sale. There can be different models. Sometimes you're buying wholesale and it looks a little bit more like a grocery store. Tends to be a little bit less intensive usually to start up. It's year round, right? So the farmers market and the mobile markets tend to be a little bit more seasonal because you're outside. And depending on where you are, right? Like in Florida and parts of California, they can be close to year round. If you're in Michigan, as you can see, there's snow on the ground in one of these photos. Um, a farmer's market is going to be harder to do year round. People are not necessarily going to want to stand out in 20 below and buy your food. So, something like a farm stop can be a good next step for that. We haven't really seen farm stops turn into a different brick and mortar co-op, but you could absolutely own a farm stop cooperatively, right? Whether that was, the farmers owning it cooperatively, whether that's the consumers, whether it's a hybrid model. I think there's a lot of room to be really creative with these models, figure out what this is. And from the folks who are doing the farm stops, they have some good resources and stuff, and they're saying that you can get them started for a fraction of the cost. Again, in the thousands, hundreds of, 10 to hundreds of thousands instead of millions of dollars. So, definitely an interesting model to look at. Again, just depending on what your goals are. A lot of the farm stops have been their focus is very much on getting as much of the money to the local farmers as possible. So they're set up in that way where the farmer is getting, a huge chunk of the cost of that, and they try to keep their overhead and their costs a lot lower at the store itself, so that they can pay the farmers, I think usually most of them are aiming for 70% or above of the sale price, which I don't know if anyone's seen those. There's like the diagram that says, farmers usually get about like 1 cent on the dollar in like the traditional food system, right? So that, farm stops are really trying to change that economic model and make sure that farmers are receiving, a living wage off of this.
And there actually is a growing wave of interest in cooperative ownership of farm stops, and there are a couple cooperatively owned farm stops. So if you check out the farm stops website, if you just look up farm stops, you'll find their website. They have a list of all of them so far, and like we said, it's kind of a new thing. They're getting them open. They're saying in about 1 to 2 years, and they're getting them open at they're saying 500,000 or a little above. It's something that we're still looking at how it pencils out on paper. If you go to the original farm stop, though, they have been able to grow. I think they've got two stores, a pack house. I mean, they've been able to like slowly build, as we're talking about, and if your goal is impacting access to local farm food and local farmers, you really can't beat it. It's being tested right now if it can provide access to affordable food in communities, lower cost food in communities where it's needed, because the volume isn't there for buying from traditional distributors and getting really good pricing. This is really based on bringing in local food and doing some incredible things for the local food industry and for the farms.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. What about this?
Yeah. So another potential, kind of way to get food into community, right, would be community gardens or a community farm. And one of the things that, you know, we've one of the obviously most successful ones is so in Detroit, D-Town Farms, was started and they did a lot of work organizing in the community, growing food, and that eventually grew into the Detroit People's Food Co-op, which is now a very large, brick and mortar grocery store that opened 2 years ago now, almost 2 years ago, not quite. Um, and so there's definitely some precedent. I think some of the really great things, I think with all of this too, like some of the things we want people to start thinking about is, what's your end goal? And there are so many paths to get there. So what makes sense in your community? How are you going to build trust? How are you going to build buy-in? Where are you going to get your members from? And, I think for Detroit and for many other communities, what we've seen too is people need food today, right? And if it takes that long to build a co-op, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, but what can you do in the meantime, right? That helps show that you are there for the community and, and meets that immediate need. And so for Detroit, that was, they started by growing food. They took, a bunch of vacant lots and started growing food in the community. And then that grew into, eventually saying, okay, we're going to own a grocery store and we're going to build that.
And what I love about this example, Ann and I were talking about it when we were prepping the other day, is that when they started D-Town Farms, I mean, that took building relationship with the local government around the land. It took building relationship with local people who needed the food, who were now getting food in a way they weren't used to. It took building up the muscle as an organization to have staff and understand what that's like and deal with all those things. And so they built something that was incredibly impactful on their community just as it was if they had stopped right there. But it was something they could grow over time. And the skills they built through D-Town Farms, I don't think they would disagree with us or were the foundation of them being able to do something as difficult and complicated as to build a very large brick and mortar grocery store.
Yeah.
All right. And then we've also, of course, seen smaller ones, and they don't all have to lead to food co-ops. I think that's one of the points you kept making and we were talking that I really love is that, and if this ended up the end destination, oh no, we have an amazing local farm. Like if if that was supposed to be a step toward a grocery store, but instead becomes where your community wants to land, that's still having a major impact.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for all of these, right? You have a successful farmers market that runs for 10 or 15 years and your community is getting food. Good job. You've met the need. You've done an amazing thing. And so, I think that's part of what we just want to encourage everyone to think broadly, to think about like, what does my community need? What's the right business concept? What's the right ownership model? And how do I put all those pieces together? And to know that there are so many ways to meet that need, whether it's, we want access to local food, whether it's, we want access to organic food, we want just access to food. We want fresh produce, like whatever your goal is, there's lots of ways to meet that. This one I think is a really cool option too, and again, could be either an end goal. I think a lot of folks are using it as a stepping stone, but doing pop-up markets. So this example is actually it was is also in LA, but we've got other ones. But this one, they were working with corner stores to help make some of those connections to suppliers, to get more fresh produce into corner stores, and more local food. This group in particular is also focused on supporting BIPOC farmers and suppliers. So making a lot of those connections. So there was Prosperity Market was working with the LA Food Policy Council and corner stores to do these little pop-ups. Again, building community, bringing people out. It was like education. They do cooking demos. They'd have a DJ, and then they'd have the food as well. It was good publicity, so folks would actually go into the corner store as well and see. And honestly, Emma's Meat Market is like more than it's a carniceria, right? And does sell fresh food, but is a much smaller store. So getting people into things. We've also seen, again, we talked about, Sola Food Co-op, which was doing like pop-up farmers markets. Suncoast recently opened their co-op. They were doing like CSA boxes ahead of time. So we've seen a lot of that sort of pop-up piece of like, let's start doing it, right? Like, let's just start organizing, being in our community. Let's start showing up. Let's start getting food. I was part of a startup food co-op where we did a CSA as well, again, to like engage members, to get people signed. I think we got members through, we did the CSA and then they joined the co-op. So it was a great organizing tool and a great way to like get people involved, get people engaged, and to be providing food in the meantime while we were working towards the longer term goal.
And I love how this illustrates. So I think sometimes people are like, okay, so this is just, create food access. I'm like, well, maybe the goal was create a certain kind of food access and increase health around food in this area of the community. But one of the core values, I'm going to point out to the core value concept was to lift up BIPOC farmers, right? And they're able to, you do this as food co-ops. If you kind of thought through your purpose, your core values, you're like, but, through a grocery store, they have core values too, very specific things to their community that they want to accomplish. The way they want to accomplish getting that food need met is very specific to them. That's where the core values come in, and they're manifesting that through these pop-ups as well. It doesn't have to be a brick and mortar store. And I think it's kind of a new thought to think about how specific and effective some of your goals can be with this. And I wanted to ask Ann, did they start doing all of this, or did they start and kind of add on education and different pieces as they grew?
Yeah, so they started with just a couple of the pop-ups at the corner stores, and they now have a mobile market and a mobile farmers market. So they now do this like all the time. This is sort of their permanent for Prosperity Market, their permanent thing. So they are, they're in LA, they're in a couple of different neighborhoods. And so they do periodic ones. They have one coming up in April if anyone happens to be in LA, look them up. And they try to make it fun, and but their main goal is to promote BIPOC producers, chefs, farmers, and to like increase sales opportunities for them. So that's where they're sourcing most of their food from. They bring BIPOC chefs to them. They have DJs, so they make it a party. That's like part of their model. But they from these like smaller pop-ups, they do now have more permanent, more infrastructure that they can do these on a more regular basis. And they're not, I don't think they're trying to grow to necessarily to a brick and mortar. I think this is kind of the model that they're using is that sort of mobile farmers market. But they did start with just with the pop-ups that were, a little bit easier access, didn't require quite as much. They could kind of test the model, figure things out, see which products people liked, and then, start to form a lot of those relationships.
And yeah, actually, Mercedes from our team at FCI also put in the comments that they've evolved to shipping some of these BIPOC farmer products as well.
Oh, that's
So
true.
you keep
Yeah.
adding pieces on, right? And evolving. It's always possible to continue to evolve. All right, I'm going to touch on buying clubs for just a minute, because we have we have an example here that I wanted to share. So, buying club means collective direct purchasing together. These used to mean for decades that we came together and we had a catalog from a wholesale supplier, and we picked out what each of us wanted and we put in an order. And because we ordered together as the buying club that was incorporated, that we were technically getting wholesale prices, and then we were doing the labor of distributing the food ourselves, and it was making food cheaper. Collective direct purchasing is still the core of buying clubs, but less and less major wholesalers, even of natural foods, are willing to allow buying clubs to purchase direct from them, unless you're in the West Coast. I think Star West Natural still does allow it. But it's getting harder and harder to do just that. Although it can be done. There are groups doing it. They usually use website software these days rather than just a paper catalog and people, handwriting their orders. But this has been done for decades. And this is how a lot of food co-ops in the second wave that formed in the 1970s, this is how most of them started. And so they started through these buying clubs. Paid staff in every example we've seen of this in the last 20 years, they've needed paid staff. At least part-time, if it, but it generally grows. And they can distribute from a large distributor, like I said, or local farms only. We've seen more and more growing, especially in the Plain States, where it is just local farm foods. It's local meats, it's local dairy, it can be produce. But the whole buying club is just to get access to those local farm foods and to give local farmers an opportunity to sell directly into their community. So many local farmers don't have enough volume to sell directly into their community's north store outlet. So they're shipping it to the next big city. They're driving it to the next big city, and they're not actually feeding their community. And this has become an option that also works in rural communities that are agricultural based and allows those farms to sell directly into their community without having a storefront that they can sell to in their community. So, and a great example of this is the Sitka Food Co-op in Sitka, Alaska. And they started as a buying club and then came to call themselves a buying club on steroids because just the buying club, everybody showing up, and that's at the top, them showing up to repackage and pick up their orders together. They were doing over 500,000 in sales a year. And eventually now, if you look at their website, they're kind of a hybrid between a store. They do have set hours. They do keep certain products in stock, but they still do a lot of that pre-buying purchasing model to keep their prices low. Now, in their case, the prices low things works because if you know where Sitka, Alaska is, it is an island. It is an island in Alaska. And if you didn't know, Alaska food prices are just wildly high because the transportation costs. And so this has been really actually has saved people money. Sometimes it still does, but though unfortunately, because how wholesaling works these days, your volume dictates the price you pay. So sometimes it saves money, sometimes it doesn't. But it can be a really powerful method, and they still intend to have a full brick and mortar cooperative grocery store at some point when it is right for them. But this has become something really powerful for their community. So that is another possible way. And Anne, I forgot, we've had questions uh both from folks about whether we can share a PDF of these slides afterward. People wanting those in addition to the video. Are you okay with that? Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. We can share them.
All right, great. If you can put your email in the chat if you want those sent to you. A lot of people who register just want the video. But if you want the PDF of the slides, please do go ahead and put that in the chat. So why is a session by Food Co-op Initiative? And we exist to support communities that are trying to start cooperative grocery stores or convert existing grocery stores to the co-op model. Why are we showing you other business concepts? I mean, and the real reason, as Ann said so well earlier, is we want you guys to build the right thing for your community. That's our goal. If it turns out to be a brick and mortar grocery co-op grocery store, we are so excited to support you. But sometimes communities have use one or more of these reasons why it may not be the first right the first rights the right first step, excuse me, nor even the right ultimate goal. They need more speed. Sometimes they just need to get food into their communities a lot faster. On average, before COVID, it took 5 to 7 years to organize and open a brick and mortar cooperative grocery store. We saw that number really go up after COVID, and we're still not sure if that was the fluke of there were a couple really rough years for financing things, for organizing people that put a lot of co-op startup food co-op efforts in a difficult situation or even on pause, or if that's going to become permanent. But let's just be optimistic and say it goes back to an average of 5 to 7 years. Some communities, that's not fast enough. Building up sometimes is needed, as Anne was pointing out, that D-Town Farms happened first, then Detroit People's Food Co-op, because they had built up knowledge, they had built up a volunteer base, they had built up trust that they were able to execute. And sometimes there's a lot of building needed. We're going to talk a little more about that. And then third, sometimes you test the feasibility of a cooperative brick and mortar grocery store, the business feasibility, and the pieces just aren't fitting. And they aren't just a little off, they're really off. And there's a really good chance that going straight to brick and mortar is putting your community's resources at really high risk and really high risk of not actually meeting the need. So we're going to go into these in just a little more depth. This is you, Anne.
Yep. So yeah. So again, as JQ was saying, like it takes a long time to build a brick and mortar co-op grocery store. You have to get owners, right? You have to do all the organizing, you have to find a site, you have to raise the money. Like there's a lot of pieces to that. And it can be totally worth it. There's a lot of amazing stores out there, and I would guess if you asked a lot of them, they would definitely say that it is. And it takes a long time. And so, all right, it's funny because I see that Opal's actually on here from Market 166. So we're using you as an example, but you guys are doing a great job, right? There's like here's I love the like it's mini Market 166. They're doing pop-ups, right? Because they want to make sure that their community has food now. And I think they're also using this to like test products and source things and show like what's possible, right? Like what could you shop for when the co-op opens? I think that's just like a really great idea to sort of pilot things. I will say like I'm all about pilot projects. I think that they're just like the best. Like, what is the minimal thing you can do that starts you down that path, right? Because I think it's so hard to go from nothing to, the million, couple million, sometimes 20 million, depending on your size and scale, like millions of dollars brick and mortar grocery store, like that's a big leap. And particularly we see this, I think, in communities where food hasn't, but where maybe the grocery store closed 5 or 6 years ago or things like that. It's not always just about the grocery store itself, right? But like you have to change behaviors. People are getting their food somewhere. Everybody's still eating. Even if it's really hard, they're still getting their food somewhere, right? We still all are going to go somewhere. We're not going to just not eat. And we're figuring out things. And so you need to start changing behavior. You need people to start getting used to like, oh, there's something actually in our community now. Maybe we weren't used to that because we've either never had it or it's been gone for a while. And so I just really think like the intermediary steps are really great. They start to prove your model. They build relationships and suppliers with your suppliers, right? They start getting everything there. And if you're going to go look for funding, um, then you actually have something. You've done something, and it's a lot easier to prove a concept when you actually have a pilot or you have something on paper that you can be like, well, we did, these 5 markets, and this is how much revenue we got. So, we can start to think about scaling. We've shown that we are actually capable of starting to do some of these things versus if all you have is a projection on paper. It's a little harder to get funding sometimes or for people to say, yeah, that's actually going to work. So making sure that you're meeting those needs, getting things done a little bit faster and thinking towards, it can be very strategic. You can use it to build. And hopefully then there's like actually food in your community that day, which we all need, right? We all need access to healthy food in our communities.
I love your point about changing behavior. That actually came up, if anyone knows the Renaissance Co-op Market, which Co-op Grocery, which did not survive, but it was basically, we see it really as the start of the fourth wave of food co-op organizing, of Black-led food co-op organizing coming back to the fore. They had one of the major factors they said in their closure is that they had a hard time changing people's behavior. People were used to getting on the bus, going out to the ring road, getting all their shopping done, and coming back on the bus and getting them to even walk, go, a quarter of a mile to this grocery store in their community. It's just that it was hard to get people to change behavior, to know how to utilize that when it hadn't been in their community for a long time. So I think that's a phenomenal point to bring forward is that this begins the conversation about food being in the community. All right, building up is sometimes needed. It can take time to build all of the resources. These on the left are the resources from the food co-op development framework. You need to build for building, if you want to build a brick and mortar grocery store co-op or any kind of co-op, you need the information and knowledge. You need the people, there's the people power. You need trust. You need systems for running all of that. It's complicated to run any business of any size, and you need to raise the money, right? Two of the things that can really take a lot of time that it can be starting with a faster, lower risk business concept can, in some cases, help you build some of these resources, especially trust. Community trust can't be rushed. As people often say, and this is predominantly, you hear this, definitely this wisdom from the Blackleg community is, organizing at the speed of trust and that you can't go faster than people trust what is happening. And that takes a lot of communication, a lot of connecting, a lot of listening, a lot of engaging. Sometimes a project like this can help you build up trust, and there's just not enough trust to jump all the way to a retail grocery co-op. And this is true in any community that hasn't had them before. We've seen this in the suburbs as well of big cities, of, bedroom communities where people are like, people don't start stuff like that here. We just have corporate chains. We don't know what that is. And so trust has to be built in what this is and that people want it. And then cooperation takes decentralized leadership. Those of you who are on boards where you have 2 board members at your startup who are doing everything, you'll get through it. It will pass, but man, you know what that's like, right? And if you continue that way, if it really don't develop the leadership in our community, and that takes time to understand what we're doing for people to feel leaderful and feel like they can step forward, then we've watched startups actually crumble that had everything on paper look great, but there were just 2 leaders and no one else doing any of the work, no matter how hard they tried, and it just kind of fell in on itself. We have to develop leadership from within our community, and a smaller project helps people learn how to lead. It gives them opportunities to take on lower risk opportunities to develop their skills and to feel like they can step forward. And I think, Anne, you added this or was from our conversation, but I liked this phrase a lot. Are we building our co-op grocery store from a resourced foundation? And maybe this a step like this in between will help you become more resourced as a community. And last but not least, feasibility isn't found yet. If your business concept is we want and need a brick and mortar co-op grocery store, and then you test that through the feasibility process, you get a market study, and you use that market study to build a financial pro forma, and you try and, find the location that you can afford, and you even put in, well, what if we get the land for free? And none of it's penciling out. It shows that there's a very high likelihood that if you opened the store, it would close. Then do you just stop organizing? Well, no, first off, you go through an adjusting phase and sometimes solutions can be found. But even what if it really can't? What if right now it just doesn't even come close when you go through the feasibility phase? You've built this co-op for a reason to address getting some kind of either address building a local food system to getting access to fresh food to folks, whatever those core reasons are, they can still be met. So if the adjusting doesn't work, you can go back and say, okay, we've built something really meaningful to accomplish this. We as a community, we have all this. What about one of these other models as a starting point for us, as a way to start serving our communities? And you don't have to even give up on the dream, but maybe it's something you can do now while you readjust and figure out how a grocery store that's community owned can work in your community. Wow, that's weird. Oh, there you go.
This one's me. So yeah, I think, again, we're not trying to tell anybody anything. Like you all have to make the decision for what makes sense in your community. Um, as I think you've heard us say, like opening a retail co-op grocery store is hard. It takes a long time. And grocery stores are hard. Part of that is just like grocery stores are really hard to run. They have a 1 to 3% profit margin if you're lucky. Many of them don't make any profit. It is not a it's not an REI. It's not a high margin business. And so running a grocery store in and of itself, regardless of how it's owned, is very challenging to do. Which is, I mean, that's why my program exists because we know that and we're trying to help provide some of those financial resources. To get grocery stores done, or other retail models. Again, we've supported, a lot of the ones I shared were grantees of ours. And then building a co-op is also hard, right? So like building that shared ownership model, right, where you are bringing people in, building that trust, everything JQ talked about. Each of those on their own is challenging, and then you put them together and you kind of double it a little bit, right? Like you're trying to go into a very challenging, business concept, and using what is incredibly powerful. I mean, we wouldn't be here if we didn't believe in the co-op ownership model, right? Like we're all here because we believe in the co-op ownership model. We believe in community ownership. And that is, I think, really important. And so again, we're just trying to show that like you can, if community ownership, what are your values? What are the things you're trying to accomplish? And there are so many ways to get there. And maybe your brick and mortar grocery store is the thing that you really want. Just go into it knowing, set those expectations. Because I think that is actually one of the things. And I've been part of a startup grocery store that didn't make it after about 5 years of organizing. And I've been part of co-ops that have made it. But you don't you don't want to, if you go into it with unrealistic expectations, that actually can be sometimes the worst thing you can do. And that is, at least from my experience, that's what we found. The folks who started our co-op organizing thought that we would have a store in 2 to 3 years, and that is the expectation they set in the community, right? It was, come on, join, give us your money, we're going to do this real quick. And then 5 years later, we had 2 board members left, and most of the founding members didn't even live in that neighborhood anymore. And we folded. Like we went, we weren't able to go there because I think we hadn't sort of dug in and really set the right expectations and sort of and recognize the reality. And so part of this is just like it's important to know that reality and to figure out what makes sense for your community and to set the right expectations so that again you're continuing to build trust, right? If you're going into it and you're like this is a long haul and we're all in it together and we're going to get there and we believe in it and we can build towards that, like that's going to feel a lot better to people. Oh, and by the way, we're also going to like do a farmer's market along the way, right? Or we're going to do a CSA box or whatever it is because we know we need food now. Whatever makes sense for your community, we're not telling you what that is, but just making sure that you know that like this is doable
Mhm.
and it's going to take a lot to get there. So if you're committed, then let's be committed and let's make sure we bring the communities along, like your community along in a way that is uplifting and building forward.
And Anne, even I said when we were putting these slides together, I wrote the word hard, and she's like, "Is that a little harsh?" And I would say, "I'm actually really glad we're saying the word hard. I think we want to be honest, and I don't know if we've been honest enough about this in the startup food co-op moment historically. This is incredibly hard, and part of like Anne said, part of the hard is just it's a hard industry, and the grocery industry is morphing fast." And so not only is it narrow margins, it's just morphing fast. And so there's a lot that is unknown. And so it's going to be hard. Now, to say that, to add that though, as Jennifer said in the comments from Blue Hill Food Co-op, and so worth it. Yes, absolutely. We organizing and opening a brand new retail co-op grocery store is incredibly powerful. And actually recently in the last year asked some organizers of startup food co-ops that have been organizing 10 years or more. Some of them have their store open now, some still don't. And I really didn't know how they were going to answer. We brought them to a peer group. We have our peer groups for startup food co-ops, and we said, we have just one question, and they knew what the question was, and they were just going to talk. We have one question for you. If you could go back and start over, would you do it? Would you still organize a food co-op? Would you chosen something else? And some of them have been organizing 10 years and still don't have a store open. And we did not know what they were going to say. And they blew us away by every single one of them saying yes. Yes, they would have done it. And they had also, though, were all startups that had done other things along the way, like CSA boxes, like actually during the COVID event that they put together a phone tree, called all their owners, and were putting together food boxes and delivering them. They had become the co-op had become something in the community long before the store came along. But also the store, once it arrives, like in the case of like Detroit People's Food Co-op, was one of the ones that answered yes, we would do it again. The economic impact is many, many, many magnitudes higher. So we'll start there. Just the economic, if you're worried about economic impact on your local community, on farms, the economic impact is just incredibly high for a food co-op compared to something like a farmer's market. But it creates solutions that others, some of these other solutions, it creates impacts they can't necessarily produce. The shared community space, the sense of community pride, like I said, the job creation. There's a lot of things that a co-op grocery store, and it becomes kind of that central force, as food co-ops will tell you, in November when there was the crisis around SNAP access, grocery stores, chain grocery stores just said, yeah, we might or might not be able to accept it. Food co-ops across the nation were called by all of their food organizations in their communities and said, what are we going to do? And we're organizing solutions, ways people could still get their benefits, ways people could donate bags of food. But the co-op became the central hub of saying, community food is a community right, and we do that together. So the impacts really cannot be measured even just in money of when you can build a brick and mortar co-op grocery store, and they have staying power even among startup food co-ops in all different types of communities who listened to advice from all different places and did things differently. We put them all together. We're still seeing at this point over the last 20 years, the FCI has been tracking it, a 72% 5-year stay open success rate, which is incredibly high for grocery stores. It's incredibly high for the food industry. And that's including a bunch of things that were maybe a little ill-conceived, along with some really well-focused efforts. So the staying power, and these food co-ops stay for decades. Some of these pictures on here on the left, that's Outpost Natural Foods. They've not only been around since the 70s, they now have 5, 6 stores throughout their community. Briar Patch Food Co-op, on the right, like these co-ops stay for decades, and we're seeing it with startups too. So we are seeing that startups, once they stabilize, startup groceries owned by grocery stores are really there for the long haul and serving their communities. We're going to see if anyone, we have time for a little Q&A. I'm going to leave this on the screen for a second, just in case you want to find Anne and her organization, because I know people are going to forget from the first slide. So I'll leave it up while we've got time for a little bit of Q&A. Um, yeah, the community is better for the co-op having, I love this, Lisa. The community is better for the co-op having existed, even if it doesn't become the store. And I don't know, Lisa, if you're organizing a startup food co-op, do you mind unmuting for a second? You don't have to.
Yeah, I'm at a coffee shop. Sorry. I'm
Oh,
the Rudy.
sorry, Lisa.
No way.
Okay, we're good then. Thank you. You're with Rooted Carrot. And
Yep.
it's an amazing statement. The Rooted Carrot folks are from Cedar Falls, Iowa, and they have been organizing and working so hard and have been so close and had sites fall through. They're still organizing. And to hear you say the community is better for the co-op having existed, even if it doesn't become a store. Um, that's a pretty powerful statement. Any other comments or questions folks want to share? Okay. Well, I'd like to share a closing thought that actually isn't mine. It comes from Alana Hines, who is food cooperative organizer extraordinaire, works with the DC of National Coop Grocers. And the quote is, communities do deserve the cooperatively owned food system they're calling for, which is oftentimes the brick and mortar grocery store. They also deserve the opportunity to build it successfully. That means meeting the vision with honesty, guidance, and intention so that together we create the strongest path that truly delivers the access, equity, and impact the community deserves. And I think that is a lovely way to sum up um, HFFI's goals, FCI's goals in sharing this information with you today. All right. And with that, I'm going to thank Anne for coming out and making this possible. And honestly, this was something we've been loosely talking about. Sad, like we need a way to talk about other possible models. It was Anne who really had the vision for this is what needs to be talked about. This needs to be happened. And I believe your organization is planning to, over the next couple of years, flesh this out more, talking to communities about the paths to possible ways. That's correct, right, Anne?
Yeah, we're going to be building out a lot of our technical assistance resources. Generally, we work with, not just co-ops, we work with all food retail and food retail supply chain projects. So, definitely wanting to build more resources. We get a lot of the communities saying, we need food access. Now what? And so, one of our goals is to really help provide examples, right? And provide insights so that people can say, oh, look, that might work in our community, or that piece makes sense. And again, I think that's just part of the goal of today is like, think creatively, right? There are so many ways to meet the needs of your community, of your co-op, of the organizing you're doing. And, it doesn't have to be, there's no one size fits all in this work. It is really, truly, based on what makes sense in your community and how you want to think about that. And so, we've seen lots of places where they've done a feasibility study. This isn't just for co-ops, right? And said, you know what? The grocery store doesn't actually make sense there. It's not going to bring in enough revenue. It's not in the right place, whatever it is. And honestly, the most successful folks are the ones who have taken that and said, okay, then what? Like, now what? Well, how do we pivot? We still have these values, right? We still have a community that needs food, or we still want local food, or we want to support a local farmer, like whatever those values are. And they're doing some really cool stuff, right? Like they're just like tapping into like, okay, what are the assets that already exist? What are those resources? How can we, keep building, keep meeting the needs of the community? Just thinking about something a little different. Like I said, I think, the farmers market one, I love that where they had all of these farmers markets. That organization runs like 10 of them in LA. And but they
Mm.
were hearing from people like, oh, we can't always make it to the farmers market, right? And so they've created this whole online ordering platform where you can just like order, go pick it up. They've made sure it's accessible to Snap. So again, like even though they've been running farmers markets for about 10 years and have this huge thing, they're still listening to those needs in their community and pivoting, right? And then finding a different model, finding something that's going to work, that's going to continue to grow, continue to meet those needs. I mean, honestly, a lot of our grocery stores are doing that too, right? Like grocery stores and co-ops across the country are continuously saying, how do we meet today's need? Because it's always changing. And so we
Yeah.
really we want you all to think expansively, think about how you can get there, and know that both of our organizations are here to support you along that path.
Absolutely. And if you're determined toward a cooperative grocery store, we can be supporting you in educating, learning, and building that path while trying these other things. Or even sometimes, though, I want to be clear that you can get through the feasibility process and the first answer says it doesn't work. And there's some repenciling, and repenciling works. Detroit People's Food Co-op did not work on paper in the beginning, right? And so we're not saying like that you can't forge this path even when it doesn't look obvious. We're just saying think about all the options and ways you can start serving your community. I do want to take just a minute before we wrap up to thank our sponsors. These are our cooperative partners. They're are people who are also invested in the future of food justice, who are participating in the series by funding it so we can make it free to everybody. And so just a big thanks to them. Check out these organizations. And I just want to say real quick, we do have a couple more, and I didn't get it changed. We have a couple more sessions coming up later today. I wish today's our one day that we have 4 sessions because we wiggled this in because when Anne had this idea, I'm like, it has to happen. So we just wiggled in an extra one. We have 3 more sessions coming up. And we are like, if you look at www.fci/FCI live, you will see the full listing of all of our sessions for the rest of today, and there are sessions Wednesday and Thursday. And thanks, Mercedes just put in the link in the chat to see the rest of the sessions that will be happening today that you can register for. And with that, thank you again for being here and to Anne, and we're gonna do.